Hi there. Welcome back to Of Gods and Game Masters. I may not be a necromancer, but I do play one in a lot of tabletop role playing games, and I do play one in my Cozy Necromancer series here on YouTube and over on TikTok. By now, we've all heard or seen the many times the following question gets posed: why is necromancy evil, but enchantment isn't? In the context of fantasy worlds, to be clear. There are a lot of good explanations for this and explorations of it, but I think they miss some key points about the way necromancy is conceived of, starting with its origins as a concept in real world magical practice and belief. First of all, I'd like to express very clearly that any application of enchantment that abrogates free will is evil, arguably more so than doing actual physical violence. That's another video. But here we're talking about necromancy. Most of the arguments seem to follow the lines of what's evil about using dead bodies. To a certain extent, if that's all it was, they'd have a point. Except for one specific note: bodily autonomy. In most modern societies, especially the West, we determine what is done with our bodies. After we're dead, we get burned, buried, etc., according to choice and means. Our organs can't be taken, even to save the life of another after our deaths. Why does that principle exist? Fundamentally, it's because our bodies may be the only thing we have ever truly owned, the only thing that was ours. Abrogating that right means we never even belong to ourselves. And the real problem is that's not all necromancy is. It's conceived of many different ways in many different fantasy worlds and game settings and game systems. And in D&D specifically, it has very specific connotations which we'll explore. Obviously, all this can be changed for your own setting or whatever, so it's not set in stone, but it'll help explain some things. To really get the explanation right, we have to go back to the origins of necromancy, both the word and the practice that it described, at least in the West. It can't really be used to describe Asian systems accurately. They usually operate under a very different paradigm and have their own words for even similar practice. Necromancy is a Greek compound word. Necro obviously means death, so mancy means magic, right? Nope. Well, sort of. The root mancy actually refers very specifically to divination, determining the future. So, necromancy is the art of divination by using the dead. Historically and mythologically, this meant summoning ghosts and binding them or bribing them in order to force them to answer questions about the world, often the future, because the dead were seen as being outside time and unbound by its strictures. So, right at the beginning, we see a difference. Necromancy explicitly deals with ghosts, which are probably the souls of, or at least the shades of, the dead, and certainly seem to have knowledge and sapience, even if they're not the actual souls of the departed. Now we come to the next part: animated corpses. The argument seems to be that animated objects are simply objects given animation by and controlled by magic, with no part of the person remaining. This is, under most Western conceptions, and most others actually, but I don't, a purely modern concept. Animating corpses or even other objects was done explicitly by imbuing them with spirits. In the case of the dead, most often their own, but sometimes demons or other evil spirits, all of whom are compelled by the practitioner, the same way enchantment compels the living. It's a step even farther into the dark because not even death is an escape from slavery. And yes, I use that word very intentionally. The modern conception of necromancy, though badly skewed from it, owes a great deal to the Voodoo concept of the zombie, which is explicitly an enslaved soul trapped in its dead body, bound to the will of the Bokor for eternity, aware of its plight, but unable to even complain about it. It was the fears of enslaved people made manifest. One could even create a zombie astral, which was the enslaved spirit without the body, kept in a jar. Let's head to the ancient world of the Near East, right? Where arguably most of our modern magical tradition stems from, and certainly much of our ideas of undeath. Again, The modern argument seems to be that animating the body is just corporeal, nothing remains of the person. But in Egyptian myth, which is the source of many of our notions, this is explicitly not the case. Not only is the body itself considered one of the parts of the soul, the ket, but undead like mummies are specifically animated by another part of the soul, usually the ka, which is the life force, but sometimes the kaibit or shut, the shadow. In Egyptian myth, like many others, one was barred from the afterlife if they had no body to inhabit, thus the practice of mummification. In Mesopotamia, the oldest reference to the dead walking is as hungry dead, as Ereshkigal promised to send up the dead to devour the living. Those undead were as much demon as they were undead, called Galu, probably the original source of the Arabian ghoul, and thus our modern ghoul. They clearly saw undead as inherently evil or at least dangerous. But I digress, again, as I usually do. Now, obviously, none of these things automatically apply in any given fantasy world. But there is still a notion of bodily autonomy, and another interesting thing common to nearly every culture. Improper burial angers the dead or traps them in the world. Disturbing the remains of the dead does the same. There is an indelible connection between the body and the soul that used to inhabit it, and disturbing one disturbs the rest of the other. Getting animated and used as slave labor or soldiers probably counts as pretty disturbing to the soul that originally owned the body, even if it isn't actually in there, which in most cases it probably is, or at least an echo of it. Mindless undead are basically a modern concept because if they appeared mindless in earlier lore, it was because they were constrained and there was definitely something in there. Let's get into specific applications. In editions of D&D prior to 5e, undead were created through the invocation of negative energy, a specifically evil force that literally endangered the material world as it was accumulated. In modern D&D, even mindless undead have intelligence, wisdom, and charisma scores, all indicators of a mind and a personality, however weak it might be. In addition, they have an alignment, neutral evil. Process used to bring them back, barring exceptional cases, turns them to evil. Left uncontrolled, they wreak evil on their own. The official stat block does have some contradictions, stating both that nothing is left of the original, but, and I quote, the magic animating a zombie imbues it with evil, so left without purpose, it attacks any living creature it encounters. And that's just undead. The other things necromancy can do, well, pure necrotic damage, sure, I can see a case for that not being worse than burning to death in a fireball. Rotting to death and burning to death are both pretty grisly. But how about, say, magic jar? It solely exists to allow your soul to completely steal another person's body. It can be permanent. That creature is imprisoned in the jar. That's at least as bad as Dominate Per. Soul Cage is like a step up in how evil a spell can be. And these are just the basic spells. The thing to understand about necromancy is, as I've said in shorts on TikTok and YouTube, it's not just about animating the bodies, which is arguably bad enough. It's about controlling the souls of others, engaging them, enslaving them, eating them, denying them the afterlife that they earned. If it was just about the bodies, well, you can get them on their feet and fighting with animate objects, a transmutation spell. Heck, for the short term at least, you get better fighters and more of them from using animate object. Let's jump over to GURPS. In GURPS, the School of Necromancy explicitly includes demon summoning and even more grisly magics. What does that have to do with death magic? Well, the line between soul, spirit, demon is super thin in most mythoi, maybe even non-existent. The arts to summon one are the same as the arts to summon another. Not to mention, we have the semi-modern confusion of necromancy with negromancy, general black magic, which informs nearly all fantasy portrayals. Most other games and settings take one of these two approaches. You're, of course, free to chart another course, but these are some of the reasons why, in the context of these worlds, from the point of view of the people that have to live there, necromancy is definitely